"This is a restricted weapons development zone, ma'am. You need to leave now." The young lieutenant's voice was sharp with authority. But when she pushed up her sleeve, a hardened general watching from afar went pale. He saw the impossible. The sun was a merciless hammer over the Sonoran Desert, beating down on the asphalt of the auxiliary lot at the Sonoran Joint Drone Proving Ground. Heat shimmered in waves, distorting the distant shapes of angular hangars and radar domes that bristled against the stark blue sky. The air, thin and dry, carried a strange cocktail of smells: hot metal, creosote bush, and the faint, sharp tang of ozone from the high-voltage equipment nearby. It was a place of secrets, a sandbox for the future of warfare, where prototype drones with lethal grace cut silent, menacing arcs across the heavens. And in the middle of it all was Kaelen Vance and her broken-down Ford F-150. At 40, Kaelen, Kay to the few who knew her, wore the desert on her face. Her skin was a roadmap of fine lines etched by a sun she no longer bothered to hide from, and her pale blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, practical bun. Her eyes, a startlingly clear blue, held a profound stillness, a calm that seemed entirely out of place in this hive of nervous energy and cutting-edge technology. Dressed in a grease-stained work shirt and faded jeans, she was hunched over the open hood of her truck, a veteran warrior in its own right, its once bright red paint now a patchwork of rust, primer, and memories. The engine, usually a reliable grumble, had coughed, sputtered, and died just outside the main gate. A sympathetic but weary guard had let her push it into this far-flung corner of the lot, a place reserved for overflow and forgotten equipment. "Just get it running and get it out, ma'am," he'd said. "This ain't a civilian auto shop." She was deep in concentration, her hands, surprisingly deft and steady, working a wrench on a stubborn bolt, when a shadow fell over her. "You lost, lady." Kay didn't look up. The voice was young, laced with the easy arrogance of someone who knew they belonged. She recognized the type instantly. A civilian contractor, probably a fresh-faced aerospace engineer with a head full of simulations and a pristine security badge. "Just fixing my truck," she murmured, her voice raspy from the dust. "Right," the young man chuckled, a dismissive sound. He was holding a tablet, his pristine white polo a stark contrast to her grimy shirt. "You sure you should be messing with vehicle systems on government property? Lot of sensitive tech around here. You could, you know, interfere with something." Before Kay could formulate a reply that wouldn't get her thrown out, another voice cut in, this one as sharp and unforgiving as broken glass. "Who authorized this?" This time, she straightened up slowly, her back protesting the movement. A young army lieutenant stood beside the engineer, his posture ramrod straight, his uniform creased to perfection. His name tag read Harris. His eyes, cold and analytical, swept over her, her truck, and the greasy tools laid out on a rag on the pavement. It was a look of instant dismissal. He saw a problem to be solved, a piece of clutter to be removed. "My truck broke down," Kay stated, keeping her tone flat and devoid of emotion. "The gate guard said I could fix it here." "The gate guard does not set policy for a restricted weapons development area," Lieutenant Harris snapped. "This is a direct violation of Section 7, Paragraph 4 of Base Security Protocols. I need to see your credentials and a work order authorizing your presence in this sector. Now." Kay's internal monologue was a low, weary sigh. Bureaucracy. The one enemy you can never truly defeat. She wiped a greasy hand on her jeans. "I'm a part-time contractor. Water reclamation systems. My badge only gets me into the utility sector. I don't have a work order to be stranded." The engineer smirked. "See? Told you." Harris's jaw tightened. "Then you are a security risk. You will pack your things and immediately arrange for your vehicle to be towed off this installation. You have 5 minutes before I call the military police to escort you." He was already reaching for the radio on his shoulder, his authority absolute, his judgment swift. Kay's shoulders slumped in resignation. Arguing was pointless. It would only escalate things, create paperwork, and draw more attention, the one thing she had spent the last 15 years avoiding. "Fine," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "No problem." She turned back to the engine bay to grab her tools. The relentless sun beat down, and a bead of sweat traced a path down her temple. Without thinking, she reached up with her left forearm, pushing up the worn, oil-stained sleeve of her right shirt to wipe it away. The motion was fleeting, an everyday gesture of a mechanic working in the heat. But in that brief moment, the fabric slid past her elbow, revealing the skin beneath. And on that skin was something that didn't belong on a part-time water technician. It was a faded, intricate tattoo, its lines blurred by time and sun, but its design still terrifyingly clear. And 300 yards away, on the observation deck of the main command tower, General Marcus Thorne, who had been idly watching the exchange through a pair of high-powered binoculars, froze mid-sentence. His blood ran cold. General Thorne lowered the binoculars, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly. The faces of the aides around him, moments ago attentive to his analysis of the new Reaper swarm drone flight patterns, blurred into an irrelevant background. The hum of the command center, the sterile chill of the air conditioning, the very ground beneath his feet seemed to fall away. All that existed was the image burned onto his retina, a roaring wolf's head, intricately woven with circuit diagrams and gears, its digital eyes seeming to glow even in the faded ink. And beneath it, the binary code he knew better than his own service number. 0101 GW. Ghost Wolf. It wasn't possible. It was a ghost story, a legend whispered by old-timers who'd served in the early, brutal days of the Helmand Province campaign. It was the mark of the Ghost Wolf Tactical Engineering Detachment, a small, semi-mythical unit of technical savants who operated in the shadows, fixing the unfixable, turning lost causes into stunning victories before disappearing back into the fog of war. A unit that had been wiped from the face of the earth 15 years ago. "Sir," his aide, a young captain named Eva Rostova, asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "General Thorne. Is something wrong?" Thorne didn't answer. His mind was no longer in the climate-controlled tower in Arizona. It was back in the choking dust and chaos of Forward Operating Base Sentinel in Afghanistan, 2008. He was a colonel then, his command pinned down, overrun, his men fighting a losing battle against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere. Their trump card, a battery of Hellfire missile launchers, was useless, the guidance systems fried by a mortar blast. They were blind, defenseless, calling in desperate, unanswered pleas for air support that couldn't see their targets. Death was not a possibility, it was an imminent certainty. And then, the miracle. Through the screaming cacophony of gunfire and explosions, a voice had crackled over the command net. Not a pilot, not a soldier. A technician. Calm, steady, impossibly serene amidst the apocalypse. "Sentinel Command, this is technical. Stand by for Hellfire diagnostics." For 3 hours, while the base burned around them, that anonymous voice guided them, talked them through rerouting power, bypassing fried circuits, using scavenged parts from a destroyed Humvee. And then, one by one, the targeting indicators on the Hellfire consoles blinked from red to green. The missiles flew. The siege was broken. When the dust settled, Thorne had searched for the engineer who had saved them. No one knew who it was. No one had seen them. The official report listed the Ghost Wolf Detachment, who had been operating nearby, as having been ambushed and annihilated to the last man 2 days prior. No survivors. Their base was a smoking crater. The mysterious voice was written off as a battlefield anomaly, a ghost in the machine. But Thorne had seen the after-action report, a classified annex that contained one grainy thermal image of the Hellfire control bunker. In it, a small, wiry figure was visible for a split second, their arm reaching for a console. An arm that bore a unique tattoo. Rostova, Thorne's voice was a harsh rasp, pulling him back to the present. He raised the binoculars again, his heart pounding against his ribs. The woman below was packing her tools, her movements methodical and unhurried. The arrogant young engineer was gone, and the lieutenant stood by, arms crossed, tapping his foot impatiently. "Get down there. Now. That woman in the parking lot, the civilian with the red truck. Do not let her leave this base." "Sir." "G.O.," he roared, a lifetime of command authority in that single word. Captain Rostova, a seasoned officer not easily rattled, went pale, nodded sharply, and practically sprinted from the room. Thorne watched, his knuckles white on the binoculars, as she ran for the elevator. He saw the woman, Kay, close the hood of her F-150. She gave a final, cursory wipe of her hands, climbed into the driver's seat, and turned the key. The engine, to Thorne's astonishment and despair, roared to life with a healthy, throaty rumble. He watched helplessly as the red truck navigated its way through the rows of parked vehicles and turned toward the main gate. By the time Rostova's service vehicle screeched out of the command tower's private garage, the F-150 was already a diminishing speck on the desert highway, disappearing into the shimmering heat haze. She was gone. Thorne slammed his fist on the console. A ghost, vanished again. But not this time. He turned from the window, his face a mask of grim determination. "Get me a secure line to the National Archives Records Administration," he commanded to the stunned room. "Highest priority. I need to access a file. Operation Eye of the Storm." The air in General Thorne's office was thick with the silence of the late night. Outside, the Sonoran Proving Ground was a glittering constellation of security lights against the velvet black of the desert. Inside, the only light came from the cold, blue-white glow of the encrypted terminal on his desk. The screen displayed a digital vault, protected by layers of security protocols that would have stopped a lesser man cold. But Marcus Thorne wasn't a lesser man, and he was driven by a certainty that bordered on obsession. He typed a series of alphanumeric commands, his fingers moving with practiced speed, each keystroke a hammer blow against 15 years of sealed history. Accessing DoD Archive. Enter clearance code, Omega 7 Thorne Magin. Authentication accepted. Search query, Operation Eye of the Storm. A warning flashed across the screen in stark red letters. Warning, file classified top secret / Orcon / Noforn. Originator controlled / not releasable to foreign nationals. Proceed. Y/N. Thorne didn't hesitate. He hit Y. The file opened, not with a flourish, but with the dry, bureaucratic finality of death. Page after page of official reports, casualty lists, and after-action summaries scrolled past. The official story was just as he remembered it. Ghost Wolf Tactical Engineering Detachment, ambushed during a reconnaissance in force. The entire unit, 8 souls, listed as KIA, killed in action. Their base, a fortified compound codenamed Wolf's Den, was declared overrun and destroyed. A closed case. A tragic but unremarkable chapter in a long and bloody war. But Thorne knew there was more. He navigated to the file's appendices, digging deeper, past the redacted maps and sanitized summaries. And there it was. A subfolder, almost hidden, labeled, Annex Gamma. Its access was protected by yet another layer of security, one reserved for battlefield intelligence of the highest, most sensitive order. He entered his personal override code. The screen flickered, and a single, heavily encrypted text document materialized. It wasn't a standard report. It was a raw intelligence debrief, compiled from fragmented radio intercepts and a single survivor's dying testimony from a different unit miles away. The text was chilling. It described how, after the main Ghost Wolf unit was wiped out, the enemy had laid siege to FOB Sentinel, Thorne's own base. The report confirmed the Hellfire systems were down. It then detailed 12 days of inexplicable enemy losses. Sniper teams taken out by reactivated Claymore mines everyone thought were duds. Armored vehicles disabled by sophisticated, improvised explosive devices. Most critically, it detailed the miraculous repair of the Hellfire guidance systems. The source of these actions was listed as a single, unidentified operative. A ghost. Thorn's eyes scanned the text, his breath catching in his throat. Subject * unidentified female engineer, presumed Ghost Wolf affiliation. Status * maintained active defense and systems repair at Wolf's Den and provided remote support to FOB Sentinel for approximate 12 days post-official unit annihilation. Actions * credited with over 40 high-value enemy neutralizations via restored/improvised defensive systems. Solely responsible for Hellfire missile guidance restoration at FOB Sentinel, enabling successful defense of the base. Final disposition * missing, presumed deceased. He scrolled further, his hands now shaking. A linked file contained a partial medical log, recovered from a corrupted hard drive at Wolf's Denver. The entries were terse, clinical, and horrifying. Day 3 * subject sustained shrapnel wounds to left leg and abdomen. Self-administered morphine and sutured primary laceration. Continued work on perimeter sensor grid. Day 7 * evidence of severe dehydration and infection. Subject bypassed standard protocols to hotwire primary comms array for direct link to Sentinel. Day 12 * log ends. Final visual from a drone flyover shows a figure matching subject's description entering the primary communications bunker. Bunker sustained direct hit from enemy artillery 10 minutes later. No body recovered. Thorn leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning in the silence. He closed his eyes, the sterile words of the report painting a vivid, nightmarish picture. A lone woman, wounded and hunted, surrounded by the ghosts of her comrades, fighting a one-woman war with a soldering iron and sheer force of will. He had always imagined the engineer who saved him was a man, a grizzled veteran like himself. The reality was so much more profound. He now understood. Kaelen Vance wasn't just a survivor. She was a ghost who had refused to die. She was the architect of his survival, the reason dozens of his men had gone home to their families. And the official record had buried her, erased her, listed her as a casualty in a battle she had single-handedly won after everyone else was dead. He had just met a living legend, and his subordinate had ordered her off the base like a common trespasser. The irony was a physical weight in his chest. He had to find her. Not to punish her, but to understand. And, perhaps, to finally say thank you. Finding Kaelen Vance was surprisingly easy. A ghost in the military world, she was a tangible entity in the civilian one. She had a social security number, paid taxes, and was registered as the sole proprietor of Kay's Mobile Repair. The address on file led Thorn not to a house, but to a dusty, sun-bleached plot of land 20 miles out of town. The centerpiece was a sprawling, ramshackle workshop made of corrugated metal, surrounded by the mechanical skeletons of various projects, a half-restored tractor, the chassis of a dune buggy, and several unidentifiable engines in various states of disassembly. Thorn left his driver and gleaming black sedan at the end of the dirt driveway, the vehicle looking as out of place as a tuxedo at a rodeo. He walked toward the open bay door of the workshop, the crunch of his polished boots on the gravel the only sound in the afternoon heat. Inside, he found her. She was on her back on a wheeled creeper, halfway underneath an ancient-looking John Deere tractor, a shower of sparks erupting from a welding torch in her hand. The harsh, brilliant light illuminated the grease on her face and the intense concentration in her eyes. She must have heard his footsteps, because the sparks stopped. The world plunged back into shadow and silence. Slowly, she slid out from under the machine. She sat up, pushing her safety goggles onto her forehead, and looked at him. There was no surprise in her eyes. No fear. Just a deep, bone-deep weariness, as if she'd been expecting this visitor for a very, very long time. "General," she said. Her voice was flat, an acknowledgement, not a question. "Ms. Vance," Thorn replied, his own voice sounding formal and stiff in the cluttered space. "Or should I say, Ghost Wolf?" Kay gave a small, humorless smile. She reached for a greasy rag and began wiping her hands, her movements deliberate. That wolf died in Helmand, General. A long time ago. The woman who survived is just Kay. A mechanic. She just wants to fix engines and be left alone. Thorn took a step closer, his eyes scanning the organized chaos of the workshop. Every tool had its place. Every spare part was catalogued. It was the space of a master craftsperson. The official report says you all died. That the entire unit was lost. The report was accurate enough, she said, finally meeting his gaze. Her clear blue eyes were unwavering. The unit was lost. I was the only one left. By the time I managed to extract myself and make it to a civilian hospital in Pakistan, weeks had passed. When I finally got access to a news feed, the war had moved on. The base was a footnote. My team was a list of names on a memorial wall. I was officially dead. You could have come forward, Thorn pressed gently. Corrected the record. We have procedures for this. Kay let out a short, sharp breath that wasn't quite a laugh. Procedures? General, with all due respect, you know what would have happened. Endless debriefings. Psychological evaluations. Questions I couldn't answer without revealing sources and methods that were better left buried. They would have put me on a pedestal or locked me in a lab. I would have become a story, a curiosity. I didn't want to be a story. I just wanted quiet. She gestured around the workshop. This is quiet. Thorn fell silent, the weight of her words settling upon him. He understood the desire to escape, to leave the war behind. But there was still a piece of the puzzle that didn't fit, a detail from the file that gnawed him. The file on Operation Eye of the Storm, it contained an annex. A medical log, he said, his voice low. It mentioned injuries. A knee, specifically. It stated that Ghost Wolf 1, your team leader, had grounded you. You were on medical leave for a torn ligament. He watched her face closely. For the first time, a flicker of something raw and painful crossed her features. She looked away, her gaze settling on the distant mountains visible through the bay door. So you know, she whispered. I know the official record. I want to know the truth. She was silent for a long moment, the only sound the faint hiss of the cooling weld on the tractor. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. I was at a rear operating base, 50 miles away, waiting to be flown to Germany for surgery. Then the calls came over the comms. Sentinel was being overrun. The comms were in chaos. I heard the panic in their voices. I knew their systems. I knew the Hellfire launchers, I'd helped install the custom software patch myself. I knew I was the only one close enough, the only one who had a chance of fixing it in time. Thorn felt a cold dread creep up his spine as the full scope of her sacrifice began to dawn on him. So you went. Kay finally looked back at him, and for the first time, he saw the ghost in her eyes, the specter of the person she used to be. My name was on a flight manifest to Landstuhl, General. Officially, I wasn't even in the country. But I heard people asking for help. She shrugged, a simple, profound gesture. My ability to help mattered more than my assignment. So, I stole a jeep and I drove toward the sound of the guns. General Thorn didn't force Kaelen Vance to come back. You couldn't order a ghost, and you certainly couldn't command a force of nature. Instead, he made her an offer. He created a new position at the Sonoran Proving Ground, Special Technical Consultant. It came with a top-level security clearance, a modest salary, and, most importantly, a dedicated workshop, a massive, climate-controlled hangar bay stocked with every tool and diagnostic machine she could ever want. There were no set hours. No mandatory meetings. Just a single, open-ended directive: if you see something broken, fix it. The news of her appointment, and the hushed rumors that followed, sent ripples through the base. Lieutenant Harris and the arrogant young engineer who had tried to eject her from the parking lot were among the first to be briefed by Thorne himself. They emerged from his office pale and shaken. The next morning, they appeared at her new workshop, standing stiffly at the entrance. "Ma'am," Harris began, his voice barely a whisper, his parade ground posture replaced with a humbling stoop. "There's no excuse for my conduct. I was following a book that didn't account for you. I am deeply sorry." Kay, who was calibrating a drone's gimbal mount, just nodded. "The book is wrong sometimes, Lieutenant. That's why people like us are here. To write the pages it leaves out." She gestured with a screwdriver. "Hand me that T5 Torx, will you? This alignment is off by 2 microns." Her legend grew not through stories, but through action. A persistent bug in the control software for the new Stalker VTOL drone had grounded the entire fleet for weeks. Teams of engineers from Lockheed and Boeing were stumped. Kay spent 2 hours observing the flight tests, asked for the raw telemetry data, and disappeared into her workshop. She emerged the next morning with 3 lines of new code scribbled on a greasy napkin. The bug, a subtle timing mismatch between the gyroscopic sensors and the engine tilt actuators, was gone. She never explained the complex theory behind it, she just pointed to the code and said, "Try this." Her real trial by fire, however, came 3 months later. An unseasonal and violent sandstorm, a haboob, descended on the proving ground with terrifying speed. A towering wall of brown dust swallowed the sky, turning midday into a dark, roaring twilight. Power grids across the region failed, and the base's backup generators sputtered and died, their air intakes choked with sand. An alarm blared across the entire installation. It was the nightmare scenario. The Reaper Swarm, a $50 million prototype system of 50 interconnected autonomous drones, was airborne on a test flight. With the main control center offline, they defaulted to their emergency protocol, land at predesignated coordinates. But without the ground-based guidance beacons, which were also powerless, their AI couldn't find a safe landing zone. They were circling blindly in the maelstrom, their batteries draining fast. In less than 10 minutes, they would begin falling out of the sky like expensive, explosive rain. The command center was in chaos. Engineers shouted useless suggestions. Executives in Washington screamed over a crackling satellite phone. General Thorne stood watching the telemetry screens, his face grim as he watched 50 red icons blink, each one a countdown to disaster. Then, Captain Rostova's voice cut through the noise. "Sir. Look. External camera feed, Bay 7. Thorne's eyes snapped to the monitor. Through the swirling brown haze, a single spotlight cut through the darkness. It was the headlights of Kay's F-150. She had driven it into the middle of the airfield, right under the drone's flight path. The back of the truck was a nest of cables, running from its own heavy-duty alternator to a makeshift antenna she'd apparently welded together from scrap metal. She sat in the truck's cab, a ruggedized laptop open on the passenger seat, her face illuminated by the screen's glow, an island of impossible calm in the heart of the storm. She had bypassed the entire base network. She was tapping into the swarm's local mesh communication, using her own truck as a power source and a primitive transmitter. On the main screen in the command center, they watched in stunned silence as a new icon appeared, a single, blue dot labeled KAY override. One by one, the 50 red icons of the circling drones broke formation. They stopped their random search pattern and formed a neat, orderly queue behind the blue dot. With the wind howling and sand blasting against her truck, Kaelen Vance, using a command line interface she'd likely coded herself on the fly, was personally guiding a $50 million drone swarm to land, one by one, in the protected lee of her workshop hangar. The last drone touched down just as its battery indicator hit 0. The storm passed an hour later. No one spoke a word. They just watched the footage on a loop, a ghost in a rusty pickup truck, taming the storm. Kaelen Vance never received a medal for what she did during the sandstorm. There was no ceremony, no press release. It was an event too classified, too unbelievable to ever become public knowledge. Her reward was the quiet, profound respect of everyone at the Sonoran Proving Ground. Her workshop became a sort of informal training ground. Young engineers, when faced with an impossible problem, would no longer consult a manual first. They'd walk over to Hangar 7 and ask, what would Kay do? Her name became a verb, her methods a philosophy. The Vance Protocol became shorthand for any unorthodox, brilliant solution born of necessity. General Thorne found his own way to honor her. Weeks later, giving the commencement address at West Point, he stood before a sea of eager, newly minted officers. He didn't speak of grand strategies or famous battles. Instead, he told them the anonymous story of a lone engineer in Afghanistan, a ghost who, while officially on medical leave, had single-handedly saved a base because she heard a call for help. He spoke of dedication that existed outside of orders, and a sense of duty that answered not to a command structure, but to conscience. He never mentioned her name, but for the cadets in that hall, the legend of the Ghost Wolf was born anew, a benchmark for courage they would carry for the rest of their careers. Kay's life didn't change much on the surface. She still drove her old Ford F-150, though the engine now purred with a perfection only she could achieve. She still spent most of her days covered in grease, finding solace in the logic of machines. But something had shifted. The weight she had carried alone for 15 years was now shared, even if only by a few. Her invisibility was no longer a shield, but a choice. Her legacy reminds us that the most critical work is often done by those who never seek a spotlight. It's in the quiet competence of the mechanic who keeps the ambulance running, the IT tech who restores the system after a crash, the quiet ones who simply see a problem and get to work. They are the bedrock of our world, the heroes hiding in plain sight. Look around you. Who is the Kaelen Vance in your life? The unassuming colleague, the quiet neighbor, the contractor you barely notice? Share your stories in the comments below about the quiet heroes you've known. Let's fill this space with positivity and appreciation for the people who truly make a difference. Please, always comment with respect for everyone's experiences. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs a job to do.